Hey friends, back again today. Just wanting to chat with you for a few minutes about a subject that I feel like comes up a lot when people come to me for counsel or prayer. And it's a theme that I feel like I've had to overcome in my life as well. And so I thought we should chat about it today. And that is feelings of guilt and shame of failure. Just feeling like a failure in life, in whatever that is. For me, as a mother and a wife and a homeschooler, failure came when my schedule or household or children were out of order. For whatever reason. Maybe for you, it's in your career or it's in your passion that you're pursuing, in your ministry, whatever it is, but just the feelings of guilt and shame when things aren't the outcome or the things aren't going the way that you plan them to go. And so I found in my life, back at the time for years when I struggled with this constantly feeling like I failed when things aren't turning out the way that I envisioned them to or planned them to, that I just couldn't give myself grace because I held so much value on creating this perfect outcome instead of enjoying the gift of stewardship, the gift of stewarding my children and my husband and my household and my passions, my desires, my ministry, my personal growth, whatever it was that God gave to me to steward. It became more about the destination for me than the journey. I became more goal oriented than I was growth oriented. And I just kept missing the beauty of the process because of that. And so God showed me this simple truth. And it was very simple, but it was very powerful to me. And I had it written in my journal and I read it the other day and just felt like it pertained to a lot of what I hear today. And the simple truth that God gave me was this: you cannot grip the reins of victory without also bearing the yoke of defeat. You cannot grip the reins of victory without also bearing the yoke of defeat. And what that means is this: we feel guilty or shameful or like a failure when things in our marriage, our parenting, our career, our finances, our health, our passions, whatever, aren't going the way we think they're supposed to go because we've first learned to lean on ourselves for the victory. We exalt ourselves when we have success, and then we shame ourselves when we have defeat or failure in life. And so this goes again with the identity factor of saying, my victories are mine to own and my defeats are mine to own, in the sense that you have control over all of those things. And so we begin to ride these waves of, I exalt myself in victory and I shame myself when I'm defeated or when I've failed in a certain way. And it reminds me of the parable of the talents in Matthew 25. I think it starts in verse 14 and goes through when the master is leaving on a journey and he leaves his possessions in the care of the 3 slaves that he calls to himself. And I'm just going to give you a short synopsis because I want to point out a couple things in this story that the master gives the talents to each slave, and it says he gives it to according to their ability. So he gives them each a different amount of possession to steward over according to their ability. So first you must understand that God does not give you things in your life that he has not first trusted your ability to them. So as a parent, your children were handpicked for you. You are their mother or their father. God could have chosen anybody in this world to parent your kids, but he chose you because he knows you have the ability and he knows you have the heart and the resources in you to give them what they need. So that in and of itself, so whether it's your career or your passions, your ministry, your family, your wife, your husband, your kids, you must first understand that God gives those gifts according to the ability he knows you have. Whether you think you do or not, he says you do, and that's it. The second thing that struck me in this parable, that he gives them the talents to do something with. And when he comes back to take account, the first thing that the first slave says is, see, I've gained 5 more talents for you. So that natural human instinct is to say, see what I've done here? See what I've created. See, the outcome that I bring to you is this grandiose thing. Or unfortunately, this outcome is 0, which we will find on the third slave, right? He comes to the master and says, sorry, but I don't have anything to give you. I buried what I had. So what's interesting to me is that the master does not respond to the amount of talents. He doesn't say to the first one, oh, okay, you've gained 5 more than you're worthy because you've gained more. What he says is, you were faithful with what I gave you. Now, what this means to me is that God inadvertently is speaking to the nature of who we are in him and says, I'm not concerned necessarily with the number of the outcome. That's mine. But what I gave to you, I expected you to be faithful with and steward it. That's your part. That's your part of the process, is the stewardship process. What did you do with it? Not what am I getting back on my return? So what we don't know about these slaves' process is the ups and downs. We don't know if that first slave lost everything before he gained it all back. We don't know if he lost 3 talents and then gained back 8, and that's how he got his 5. We don't know his journey of defeat and victory, defeat and victory. What we do know was the outcome. So the word is overflowing with promises that God gives us of our outcome. He doesn't promise that the process is always going to be smooth and carefree. But the promises in the Bible always pertain to the outcome of faithfulness, the fruit of our faithfulness, right? The word gives us a promise of eternal life. It gives us the promise of long life here on earth, Psalm 91:16. There's promises pertaining to prosperity and healing and deliverance and restoration and renewal and blessing and joy and peace and favor with God. Okay, but these are all fruit of faithfulness. This is not about saying if you're feeling a little bit of defeat or failure in life, that means that the promises aren't good. You can't allow the valleys of your journey to attenuate the promises of the outcome. I'll say that again. You cannot let the valleys of your journey, your process, attenuate, negate, neglect, nullify the promises of the outcome, because the promises are good and true. The word says that what God has promised, he's also able to perform. So we know that. And I liken it to, I'm going to use a sports analogy because I think it's good to throw this in here. I love when God gives me a word like a picture, because to me, I think in pictures. So hopefully this helps you out. But I think of like a pitcher on a mound, okay? A successful pitcher on a mound focuses on his gift, his skill, his execution, okay? He releases what's in his hand and then he waits. He allows process to produce the fruit, taking the good with the bad. Okay? He does not hinge his victory on the strikeout any more than he will throw away his successes in response to a home run. He will take what comes and correct his mistakes, continue to steward his gifts, strengthen his skill, and practice his precision in his execution. He surrenders control of the outcome. He doesn't run to the end of the ball where the batter is, because he cannot be both pitcher and batter simultaneously. Therefore, because this is impossible for him to do, to be in both places at once, if he tries to be both, he will fail at both. So the best thing that pitcher can do to be successful is to do what God has called him to do, to steward his process, to steward his gift, to put everything he has into that the way God calls him to do it, and not worry about what that batter is going to do with what he releases. Okay, so what I'm not saying here is just kind of que sera, sera, carpe diem, whatever will be, will be. I'm not saying that we don't put forth any effort or any accountability in our lives. What I am saying is accountability does not equal control. Accountability is about stewarding, is about doing what we have in our hands, doing with what we can, what we have in our hands, and not controlling that outcome, not stressing ourselves, shaming ourselves when we find a defeated area or a failure, but to understand that we're doing what we can do with what God gives us, and the outcome belongs to Him and Him alone. That is not something that we must burden ourselves with. The only one that could ever do that was Christ. Okay, so accountability does not equal control, because control is based in fear. And fear, according to 1 John 4:18, is the antithesis of love. God is love. So fear is an antithesis of God. And control is fear. So control is not of God. You cannot control what the outcomes in your life as they come about. You can have self-control in your process, in your stewarding process. And love requires trust. If we're going to live like God and love like God and enjoy our lives the way God has given us to steward things and be the best that we can be and rise into that identity that He's given us, we must trust Him, because trust is required if we're going to respond in love and respond the way God would respond in life. Proverbs 3:5 says to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. So trust is the antithesis of control. If we're trusting, then we don't need to control things. If we're trying to control things, we're not trusting God and trusting what He says, which means we're living in fear, which means we're not living in the love of Christ. And so even if we call ourselves Christians and we go to church every Sunday and we say we know the word, if we're not doing these things, then we are not doers of the words. We are, like James says, we are deluding ourselves by saying we know all these principles and these great concepts of the word, but they're not really pertaining to our current situation. They're not our go-to. They're not our instinct. They're not the way we live. It's not our lifestyle. And that must not be. It must not be. There's only one who's ever been able to take the reins of victory and bear the burden of complete defeat, and that was Christ. He's the one who grips the reins of victory in your life, and also the one who bears the burden of defeat in your life, because that's why He laid Himself down. And so our job here today in this earth is to surrender the control. Surrender the control of the outcome and take accountability for our position in the process. Take accountability for our place in the process, in the journey. Okay, so if you're feeling defeated today, if you're feeling like a failure, you're feeling guilt and shame for the things in your life that are possibly spiraling out of control, or maybe they're not necessarily negative things, but we've now made them negative things because they're not the way we envision them to be. I want you to just stop. I want you to stop and surrender that control and ask God, ask yourself as well, what can I do to take accountability of the stewardship, of stewarding the things that God has put in my life? Because that is where your time and energy should be spent, not in trying to control what's going to come and come out of everything, but what am I going to do today to take accountability for what God has given me? Because everything that He gives is a gift. Every single thing He gives is a gift. Your kids, your spouse, your career, your passions, your ministry, your drive, your health. It is all a gift. And gifts are meant to be unwrapped and stewarded. So blessings to you today as you go out and surrender control and be at peace in the accountability of stewardship today. Love you guys.